Rashid sat in his large office, staring out of the tall glass window. The city lights blinked far below, cars moved like tiny insects, and people rushed home to their families. His office was filled with expensive furniture, shining awards, and the smell of polished wood. Yet, his mind was not on the success he had built over the years. His thoughts wandered to a small home on the other side of the city, where Amina, his wife, waited for him. Amina had been with Rashid since the days when they had almost nothing. She remembered those times clearly when they shared a small meal, counted coins for rent, and dreamed together of a better future. They would sit on an old sofa, plan their life, and promise each other that no matter how rich or poor they became, they would stay side by side. Years passed, and those dreams came true. Rashid worked day and night to grow his small business into a large company. His name began appearing in newspapers, people invited him to big events, and money started filling their lives. But with success came change. Rashid became busy, then distant. He started coming home late, his eyes always on his phone or his meetings. Amina noticed the gap growing between them, but she kept believing that this was just a phase. She cooked his favorite meals, tried to talk to him, asked about his day, and reminded him of their old dreams. But his answers became shorter, and his presence became rare. One evening, the rain tapped gently on the windows of their home. Amina had made tea and waited for Rashid. The clock ticked past dinner time, and finally, the sound of his car stopping outside brought her a small sense of relief. She fixed her scarf, smoothed her dress, and opened the door with a smile. But Rashid did not smile back. His face looked cold, his eyes avoided hers. They sat in the living room, the tea untouched between them. The rain outside grew heavier. Amina looked at him, her heart uneasy. "Rashid, is everything all right? You seem tired," she asked softly. He took a deep breath and leaned back on the sofa. "Amina," he said slowly, "I want to talk about something important." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on her lap. "What is it?" He did not look at her. "I think I want a divorce." The words fell like stones in the quiet room. Amina stared at him, unable to speak. "Divorce," she whispered, as if the word would sound different if spoken softly. Rashid nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "We are not the same anymore. I have met someone else. Her name is Zara. She makes me feel alive again." The name meant nothing to Amina, but the pain behind it felt like a sharp cut. She wanted to ask why, she wanted to scream, she wanted to cry, but instead, she sat silently. Her heart was breaking, but her pride held her still. "After everything we have been through," she murmured, her voice breaking slightly. "All the nights we spent building this life, all the dreams we had." Rashid rubbed his forehead. "I am sorry, Amina. I didn't plan for this to happen. But I can't pretend anymore." Silence filled the room. The rain outside sounded like 1,000 tiny drums, each one beating against her heart. Amina stood up slowly and walked to the window. She remembered the small kitchen where they once laughed over burnt bread, the old streets where they held hands and dreamed, and the nights they promised to never leave each other's side. When she turned back to face him, her eyes were wet but steady. "If this is what you want, Rashid, I will not stop you. I only hope you find peace with your choice." He looked at her then, for the first time that night. Her calmness surprised him. He expected anger, or tears, or pleading, but not this quiet strength. That night, Rashid packed a small bag and left. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like the ending of a long story Amina had lived for years. She sat alone in the living room, staring at the untouched tea. Her heart was heavy, her future uncertain, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that she would survive the storm. As the rain slowed and the city grew quiet, Amina closed her eyes. She had lost a husband, a companion, and a dream. But she still had herself, and that was where her new story would begin. The days after Rashid left were quiet, but the silence felt heavy. Amina woke up every morning to an empty side of the bed and a quiet kitchen. The chair where Rashid used to sit remained untouched, the cup he liked for tea stayed in the cupboard, and the house felt bigger than ever. At first, she hoped he might return, maybe call, maybe change his mind. But days turned to weeks, and the only thing that came was a set of legal papers. Amina signed them with a steady hand, though her heart ached deeply. She remembered the promise they made long ago, the promise to stay together through all seasons of life. But now, that promise was broken, and she was left to face the world alone. Soon after, Amina discovered she was carrying a child. The news came like a soft light in her dark days, a tiny heartbeat within her, reminding her that life was still moving forward. But she kept the secret to herself. Rashid had already chosen his new life, and she knew he would not look back. The first months were the hardest. Amina had no one to lean on except her own strength. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. Some said, she must have done something wrong, while others pitied her. But she kept her head high and went to work every day, managing her small job at a nearby clinic. The work was tiring, the pay was not much, but it was enough to keep food on the table. One evening, as she returned from work, her elderly neighbor, Fatima, called out from her door. "Amina, you look pale. Come inside for a moment," she said gently. Amina smiled faintly. "I am fine, Fatima. Just a little tired." But Fatima had sharp eyes. She noticed the way Amina held her stomach, the way her face carried both weariness and a hidden glow. "You are not alone, are you?" Fatima asked softly. Amina's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I am going to have a baby. Maybe babies. I don't know yet." Fatima placed her warm hands on Amina's shoulders. "Then you will not carry this journey alone. I am here, child." From that day, Fatima became her silent support. She brought warm soup on cold nights, fresh bread in the mornings, and sat with Amina when the loneliness grew too heavy. Months passed, and Amina's belly grew. She worked until her feet ached, then rested, whispering soft promises to the life inside her. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by the window, watching the city lights, and wonder what Rashid was doing. Was he happy with Zara? Did he ever think of her? But the more she wondered, the more she realized those thoughts brought her no peace. So, she started focusing on herself, on her future, and on the little soul growing inside. The day of the birth arrived with a storm. Rain washed the streets, and the clinic was nearly empty. The doctor looked at her with a mix of surprise and urgency. "Amina, you are having not one, but 4 babies," he said, eyes wide. 4. The number felt like a miracle and a challenge at the same time. Hours later, her cries of pain turned into the soft cries of newborns, 2 boys and 2 girls. When the nurse placed them in her arms, Amina felt her heart swell with a strength she never knew she had. She named them Ali, Omar, Noor, and Hina. Their tiny fingers curled around hers, their breath soft and warm against her skin. For the first time in months, she smiled with true joy. Life after their birth was not easy. The nights were long and filled with little cries. The days were busy with feeding, changing, and caring for 4 fragile lives. Money became even tighter, but Amina learned to live simply. Fatima continued to visit, helping her rock the babies to sleep, telling her, "You are stronger than you think, Amina. These children will be your light." As the weeks turned to months, the small apartment that once felt cold now held warmth and laughter. Little giggles replaced the heavy silence, and the walls were filled with the soft sounds of lullabies. Amina often sat among her children, their tiny hands reaching for her, their eyes full of innocence. "We may not have everything," she whispered to them, "but we have each other. And that is enough." Though the world outside might have forgotten her, and Rashid had moved on with his grand life, Amina found a new reason to rise every morning. Her journey was not easy, and loneliness still visited her some nights, but the love she held for her children gave her strength. Her heart, once broken, was now mending piece by piece, smile by smile, little by little. She had lost one life, but she had been given 4 more reasons to live. Years passed like pages turning in a quiet book. The tiny cries of 4 babies slowly turned into cheerful laughter, and the once silent apartment now echoed with the busy footsteps of little ones. Amina, though often tired, found herself smiling more than she had in the past. Each morning, she would wake up early, prepare a simple breakfast, and get her children ready for the day. Ali and Omar, the twin boys, were playful and curious. Noor, with her bright eyes, loved to draw on scraps of paper. Hina, the youngest by just a few minutes, liked to sit quietly and listen to stories. Their presence filled the home with a light that no luxury could buy. Amina had learned to balance everything: her work at the clinic, her children's needs, and the household chores. There were nights when she barely slept, nights when one child had a fever and another cried for comfort. But she faced each challenge with calmness. One day, "You will all grow strong and make your own paths," she often whispered to them, gently stroking their hair. Her elderly neighbor, Fatima, remained her pillar of support. On weekends, Fatima would bring home-cooked meals, play with the children, and remind Amina to rest. "You are doing the work of 2 people, my dear," Fatima would say. "But your heart is bigger than any hardship." Amina never spoke of Rashid. To her children, their father was just a name. They sometimes asked, "Where is our father? Why doesn't he visit?" And Amina would only reply, "He is on a different path." "But you are not missing anything, you have enough love here." She never filled their hearts with bitterness. Instead, she filled them with kindness, teaching them to greet everyone with respect and to never let anger guide their actions. As the years went on, Amina's efforts began to show. The children grew healthy and smart. Ali and Omar loved to help her in the kitchen, Noor started drawing pictures of their small family, and Hina became her little helper, arranging toys and folding small clothes. Even on the hardest days, they made her laugh with their silly questions and innocent smiles. Money was still tight. Amina saved every extra coin, mended old clothes, and made sure no food was wasted. Sometimes, she would skip her own meals just to make sure the children had enough. But she never let them feel poor. On their birthdays, she baked small cakes with her own hands, decorating them with whatever sweets she could find. The children clapped and cheered, their joy filling the room. One cold winter evening, as Amina returned from the clinic, she found all 4 children sitting near the window, waiting for her. "Mama, we made something for you," Noor said, her little hands holding a folded piece of paper. Amina opened it gently. Inside was a drawing, a smiling woman with 4 children around her, holding hands. Underneath, Noor had written in uneven letters, "Our hero." Tears welled up in Amina's eyes. She hugged them tightly, her heart overflowing. In that moment, she realized that though her life had changed in a painful way, it had also given her a gift, a love pure and strong, born from struggle and courage. Every evening, she told them stories. Some were about her childhood, some about faraway lands, and some about dreams they could chase. She encouraged them to study, to help each other, and to always keep hope alive. One night, while the children were asleep, Amina sat by the window with Fatima. "Do you ever think about him?" Fatima asked softly. Amina looked out at the quiet street. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not with anger, but with acceptance. He made his choice, and I made mine. My choice was to live, to raise these children, and to find strength in them." Fatima nodded, her eyes full of admiration. You are stronger than many, Amina. Life tested you, and you stood firm. The following week, Amina received a letter. It was from an old friend who had moved away years ago. The letter spoke of a wedding. Rashid was getting married again, to the woman named Zara. The letter had been sent to her by mistake, but it carried a wave of old memories. She held it for a long time, her fingers tracing the letters. For a moment, the past whispered again, but she smiled faintly. Life moves on, she said to herself. Amina folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Her heart no longer beat with sorrow when she heard Rashid's name. Instead, it beat with pride for every tear she had turned into strength, for every lonely night she had turned into a morning full of purpose, and for the 4 little lives that called her mama. The world outside still saw her as a single mother, someone left behind. But inside her home, she was a builder of dreams, a shelter of love, and a quiet fighter. Her story was not one of defeat, it was one of growth. And without knowing it, the paths of her past and present were slowly moving toward each other again. Amina's life had become steady over the years. Her 4 children Ali, Omar, Noor, and Hina were now full of life and curiosity. The little apartment that once felt heavy with silence now carried the sound of laughter, small footsteps, and cheerful voices calling Mama, from room to room. Though money was still tight, the house felt warm. One afternoon, while she was folding laundry near the window, the postman stopped by. A letter for you, Amina, he said, handing her a cream-colored envelope. It was decorated with golden edges and tied with a ribbon. She rarely received letters like this. Curious, she opened it carefully. Her eyes paused on the first few lines. The words were polite, formal, and cheerful. We are delighted to invite you to the wedding celebration of Rashid and Zara. For a moment, the room felt quiet again, as if all the sounds had faded. Rashid. The name still carried a shadow of the past, though her heart no longer ached as it once did. She read the letter twice to make sure she had not imagined it. It was indeed an invitation, sent by an old friend of Rashid's who still had her address from years ago. The children noticed her silence. Mama, is something wrong? Noor asked, peeking from behind the table. Amina folded the letter and smiled gently. No, my dear. It is just a letter from an old time. That night, after the children went to bed, Amina sat by the window with the letter in her hands. The city lights flickered in the distance, just as they had the night Rashid left. She thought of the promises they had once made, the tears she had shed, the nights she spent rocking 4 little babies to sleep. And now, here was the man who had left her, starting a new life with someone else, celebrating with music and bright lights. She could have torn the letter. She could have thrown it away and pretended she never received it. But instead, she placed it on the table and kept staring at it. There was no anger in her heart anymore. There was no plan for revenge, no bitterness rising inside. Only a strange calmness, like a chapter of a book quietly waiting to close. The next morning, she showed the letter to Fatima. The elderly woman read it and shook her head slowly. Child, this must feel heavy. You do not have to go. Amina nodded. I know. But I wonder, should I? Not for him, but for me. To show that I have survived. To show that I did not disappear when he walked away. Fatima looked at her with thoughtful eyes. Then go, Amina. Not to look back, but to stand tall. The decision was not easy. Days passed as she thought about it. She looked at her children, now growing fast, Ali and Omar already helping her carry groceries, Noor sketching pictures for her, Hina reading small books aloud. They were her pride, her true treasure. One evening, she gathered them in the living room. Children, she said gently, there is a wedding I have been invited to. It is someone I once knew. I am thinking of going. Would you like to come with me? Will there be music? Ali asked with excitement. Will we wear new clothes? Noor added, her eyes wide. Amina smiled at their innocent questions. Yes, there will be music. And you will wear something nice. The children clapped, not knowing the deeper meaning of this wedding. To them, it was just an outing, a chance to see something new. In the days that followed, Amina prepared quietly. She chose a simple but elegant dress, one she had saved for a special day. Fatima helped her find matching clothes for the children, white shirts for the boys, light blue dresses for the girls. They were not expensive, but they were neat and graceful. On the night before the wedding, Amina looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the one who had waited in tears years ago. Her face carried lines of struggle but also the glow of strength. Her hands were no longer empty, they held the future of 4 children who loved her deeply. She touched the edge of the invitation one last time and placed it in her small purse. This is not about the past, she whispered to her reflection. This is about the woman I became. Outside, the city was preparing for a weekend full of lights and celebrations. Somewhere, Rashid and Zara were finalizing their grand event, unaware that the woman they once left behind had decided to walk into their world again, calm, dignified, and unbroken. The children slept peacefully, their clothes ready for the morning. Amina sat beside them, her heart steady. Whatever waited at that wedding hall, she knew she would face it not as someone forgotten, but as someone who had built a life out of broken pieces and turned them into a home. The morning of the wedding arrived with a cool breeze and a soft golden sky. Amina woke up before the sun rose. She quietly prepared breakfast, her hands steady even as her mind wandered to what the day would bring. On the table lay the invitation, slightly folded from being opened and closed many times. Today was the day she had decided to step into a hall filled with people from a past she no longer belonged to. Ali and Omar were already awake, excited about wearing their white shirts. Noor and Hina followed soon after, carrying their small shoes in their hands. The children were full of questions. How big would the wedding hall be? Would there be flowers? Would there be music? Amina smiled at their bright faces. Yes, there will be flowers and music, she said, fastening Noor's dress and brushing Hina's hair gently. They left their small apartment together, stepping into the waiting limousine, a gift arranged by Fatima, who wanted them to arrive with dignity. The children gasped as they saw the long, shining car. It was the first time they had sat in something so grand. Amina took a deep breath, smoothing her simple but graceful dress, and held her children's hands as they settled inside. The city passed by in a blur. Lights changed, people crossed streets, and the sound of the wheels on the road hummed softly. Amina gazed out of the window, her thoughts calm. This was not a journey for anger. It was a step into the future, carrying the truth of who she had become. When the limousine stopped in front of the wedding hall, the grand building glimmered with golden lights and colorful decorations. Guests dressed in expensive clothes walked up the red carpet, their laughter filling the air. The children's eyes widened at the sight of the glittering entrance. As Amina stepped out, holding their small hands, the crowd turned to look. Whispers floated through the air. Some recognized her immediately, their eyes widening with surprise. "Is that Amina?" one guest murmured to another. "After all these years." She walked with quiet grace, her children walking beside her in neat rows. The boys held their little heads high, the girls clutched her hands tightly, and together they formed a picture that was both humble and striking. Inside the hall, Rashid stood near the entrance with Zara, greeting guests. He wore a sharp black suit, his smile practiced and polished for the cameras. When his eyes met Amina's, the smile faded. For a moment, everything around him seemed to fall silent. He saw the children, their faces bright with innocence, and his heart gave an unfamiliar ache. Amina met his gaze but did not stop walking. Her face was calm, her eyes steady, not cold, not angry, just strong. She greeted the nearby guests politely and moved toward a quiet corner with her children, finding seats away from the center of the attention. Rashid excused himself from a group of guests and stepped closer. "Amina, you came," he said, his voice low, almost uncertain. "Yes," she replied softly. "I came with my children." His eyes fell on the four little faces, each one a reflection of the life he had once turned away from. He opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. Zara, standing nearby, noticed the exchange. Her smile trembled for a second, though she quickly turned back to her guests. The music started, the ceremony continued, and the hall filled with cheerful voices again. But a quiet tension lingered. People whispered and looked at Amina from time to time, some with respect, others with curiosity. Yet she never looked unsettled. She fed her children from the plates offered to the guests, wiped their little hands, and listened to their small questions about the flowers and lights. Ali whispered to her, "Mama, why is everyone looking at us?" She smiled gently. "Because we are new faces here, my dear. Just enjoy the day." As the evening went on, Rashid found himself glancing at her often. Memories of their old life came rushing back: the small kitchen, the laughter over simple meals, the nights when they planned their future together. He looked at the woman sitting with 4 children, calm and radiant, and for the first time, his grand hall felt a little too bright, a little too loud. Amina, however, felt no bitterness. She had not come to disturb the wedding, nor to seek answers. Her presence was her only message, that she had lived, she had endured, and she had built something beautiful out of the pieces he had left behind. When the ceremony ended, guests began leaving in groups, carrying gifts and cheerful smiles. Amina gathered her children, adjusted their coats, and prepared to leave quietly, just as she had arrived. The hall lights reflected on her face, soft and warm, as she walked toward the exit. Rashid watched her go, a heavy silence in his chest. Zara stood beside him, but his eyes followed the small group until they disappeared into the evening air. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words were lost in the noise of the celebration. Outside, the limousine door closed gently. The children leaned against Amina, tired but happy from the long day. The driver started the car, and the city lights once again blurred into streaks of gold and silver. Amina looked out of the window, her heart steady. She had walked through the hall of her past with her head held high, and now she was returning to her true home, the one she had built with love, patience, and quiet strength. The wedding hall slowly emptied as the evening turned to night. Music faded, lights dimmed, and the air that once carried laughter now held only the quiet rustle of workers clearing the tables. Rashid stood by the large window, looking out at the city lights. His hands were folded behind his back, but his mind was restless. The image of Amina walking into the hall with 4 children would not leave him. Her calm face, her graceful steps, the way the children clung to her hands, it all stayed in his thoughts like an echo. It was not anger that filled him, nor regret that burned sharply, but a quiet, deep unease. Zara, now his new wife, walked toward him. Her dress shimmered under the soft lights. "You have been quiet all evening," she said lightly, though her voice carried a trace of curiosity. Rashid turned to her and forced a smile. "It was a long day," he replied. But Zara's eyes were sharp. She had seen the way he looked at Amina, the way his smile faded when the children called her mama. She said nothing more, but her expression tightened slightly as she turned away. That night, after the last guest left, Rashid sat in his room, the celebration over but his thoughts still running. He remembered the night he left Amina, how he walked out with a small bag, believing he was choosing a brighter future. He remembered her steady voice, her tearful eyes, her silence. And now, years later, she stood before him not as someone broken but as someone stronger. Meanwhile, Amina and her children returned to their modest home. The limousine stopped in front of the building, and the children stepped out, their eyes still full of the lights they had seen. Noor clutched Amina's hand. "Mama, the wedding was very big," she said. "But I liked our home more." Amina smiled softly, unlocking the door. "Yes, my dear. Big places are not always warm. A home is where hearts feel safe." The children soon fell asleep, their little shoes left by the door, their hair still carrying the faint scent of flowers from the wedding hall. Amina sat quietly in the living room, a warm cup of tea in her hands. She thought of the day not with pain, but with a sense of quiet victory. She had faced her past without fear, and she had shown her children that dignity needed no loud words. In the days that followed, whispers from the wedding reached Rashid's ears. Some guests admired Amina's strength. Others spoke about her children, wondering how she had managed all these years alone. Rashid listened but said little. Each comment felt like a soft reminder of what he had once turned away from. One afternoon, Rashid found himself driving near the neighborhood where he used to live with Amina. The streets were smaller than he remembered, the trees older, the walls a little worn. He parked his car a short distance away and sat there, watching the simple life he had left behind. He wondered about the children Ali, Omar, Noor, and Hina. Were they all his? Their eyes had carried something familiar, something he could not ignore. But Rashid knew he had no right to disturb the life Amina had built. She had walked into his wedding with her head high and left without a word, carrying a message that needed no voice. She had survived without him, and she had given her children a life of love. That night, as Zara prepared for a dinner with their new circle of friends, Rashid sat quietly, lost in thought. "Do you regret anything?" Zara asked, noticing his silence. He looked at her and hesitated. "Regret is a heavy word," he said. "But sometimes, I wonder about the roads we choose." Zara did not ask more. She turned away, her earrings catching the light, but her mind held questions she did not speak. In her own home, Amina continued her routine: early mornings, simple meals, bedtime stories for her children. She never spoke of the wedding to them again. To her, it was just one evening, one step in a long journey. She focused on her children's studies, their small dreams, their laughter that filled the small rooms like sunlight. Fatima visited often, bringing warm bread and news from the neighborhood. "You walked in there like a queen, Amina," she said one evening, her eyes shining. "People will talk for many days." Amina shook her head gently. "Let them talk, Fatima. I did not go to make a story. I went to close one." And indeed, she felt a certain peace now, a peace that did not come from wealth or grand halls but from knowing she had walked through her hardest moments and still stood strong. The past no longer pulled her down. It was behind her, like a shadow fading as the sun rose higher. Days after the wedding, life returned to its usual rhythm for Amina and her children. Ali, Omar, Noor, and Hina ran through the small apartment with boundless energy, laughing and playing in the late afternoon sun. Amina watched them, a soft smile on her face. Each giggle and small triumph reminded her why she had endured the hardships of the past years. She had built a life not for recognition, but for the love of these four precious souls. Even the memory of Rashid and his new life seemed distant now. Amina no longer thought about what he might feel or how he might have changed. Instead, she focused on the present, on the children learning to tie their shoes, sharing their small victories from school, and asking questions about the world with curiosity that warmed her heart. One quiet evening, Amina sat near the window with Fatima. The sky was painted in gentle shades of orange and pink as the sun began to set. "You have come far, Amina," Fatima said, her voice full of admiration. "You could have let anger take over, but you chose something stronger." Amina nodded. "I walked into the wedding not to show him anything, but to show myself. To see how far I've come. And to show my children what courage looks like. They should always know that no matter how life challenges them, they can stand tall. Fatima smiled. You have given them more than wealth or comfort. You have given them a mother who never gave up. The children, now sleepy from a long day of play, climbed onto Amina's lap. Ali rested his head against her shoulder, Omar held her hand, Noor leaned against her arm, and Hina wrapped her small arms around her neck. Amina kissed each of them gently. In that moment, she felt a quiet triumph that no ceremony, no applause, could ever match. Meanwhile, Rashid continued his life of wealth and celebrations. But inside, a silent thought lingered, a recognition of what he had lost. Amina had walked into his world with nothing but grace, and she had left him with a truth he could not ignore: she had survived, flourished, and built a life full of love and dignity. His grand hall, filled with decorations and laughter, could never match the warmth of the home she had created for her children. One morning, Rashid found himself driving past the neighborhood where Amina lived. From the car window, he caught a glimpse of her standing by the small gate, teaching Ali to tie his shoes while the other children played nearby. For a brief moment, he saw a woman radiant not because of wealth or beauty, but because of life itself, the life she had nurtured despite every challenge. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but he knew that no words could undo the years that had passed. Amina had already sent a message far more powerful than any conversation. She had turned pain into strength, loneliness into love, and rejection into a home full of life. Back in her apartment, Amina prepared a simple meal for the children. They sat together around a small table, talking about their day at school, sharing their dreams, and laughing over small mistakes. Amina listened carefully, offering advice, encouragement, and gentle guidance. She never mentioned Rashid, for she did not need to. Her life had moved forward, and she had no desire to bring the past into the warmth of her home. As night fell, the children went to bed, and Amina cleaned the dishes with a calm heart. She stood by the window for a moment, looking at the lights of the city, thinking about the journey she had traveled. Every step, every tear, every sleepless night, every challenge had led to this. She had won not through anger or revenge, but through quiet perseverance and love. Fatima stopped by that evening with her usual warm smile. The children are lucky to have you, Amina. You have shown them courage without words, strength without showing off. That is the greatest lesson anyone can give. Amina smiled softly. I hope they remember it when they face challenges of their own. I hope they know that life is not about what others take from you, but about what you build for yourself and for the ones you love. As she tucked the children into bed one by one, Amina whispered into the quiet night, "We have survived, my loves. And we will continue to thrive. No one can take this from us." The next morning, she awoke with a sense of peace that had long eluded her. She dressed the children in neat clothes for school, packed their little lunches, and walked with them hand in hand to the bus stop. Neighbors greeted her warmly, children waved to one another, and the small streets of the neighborhood felt alive with possibilities. Amina realized that victory is not always loud. It does not always come with applause or recognition. True victory is quiet, steady, and rooted in life itself, in raising children with love, in holding one's head high through trials, and in finding joy in the simplest moments. She had achieved something far greater than wealth or status. She had built a life of meaning and strength. And somewhere far away, in a large hall filled with luxury and celebration, Rashid remembered the calm face of the woman who had once walked into his life. He could not forget her grace, her resilience, or the little children who were a part of her world. He realized that true strength is not measured by wealth, but by the ability to rise, to nurture, and to create light in the darkest of times. Amina, in her small home filled with laughter, warmth, and love, had done exactly that. She had turned heartbreak into hope, loss into life, and sorrow into a story of quiet, unspoken triumph. And so, life went on, beautiful, humble, and full of hope. Amina walked her path with dignity, her children growing around her like four small lights guiding her forward, and her heart filled with the knowledge that she had won in the most meaningful way possible.